Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I hope you're doing remarkably well. And I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for a fabulous story, because I always say nothing beats a great story. And it's something that we can just lie back in our bed and just listen to a story, and it's always relaxing and enjoyable. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Rodney van Vuren slammed the ball of clay angrily onto the potter's wheel. He began furiously working with his hands, throwing his sponge of water over the round wedge of clay, using his steady, skilled, nimble fingers to manipulate the shapeless blob, which impressively began to yield under the firm caresses of his persuasive fingers, so it finally took on a pleasing bow-like shape. Rodney effortlessly made everything he produced on the potter's wheel look like a piece of cake, as he skillfully began to create another one of his incredible masterpieces that would probably sell for a sizable amount of money. He even gave pottery lessons 2 evenings a week and every Saturday morning, and most people marvelled at his magical touch, for he had become a proficient master of his craft, who made everything look easy, when the reality could not be further from the truth. Ostensibly his work was always in high demand, and he had a plethora of orders still on hold, and for one so young, he was making a great name for himself in the world of art. Rodney had been doing pottery since he was 13 years old, but once he became 23, his work had just blossomed. People were naturally drawn to his huge glazed pots. Some pieces could be as large as 4 foot high and 4 foot across, all glazed masterfully in resplendent blues, browns and green hues. And his incredible ability to work with glazes had gleaned for him many ardent admirers, as his signature colours were uniquely individualistic. Rodney was ever thankful to have a job he loved, where he worked comfortably from home, according to his own unique schedule. He was a free-spirited man, who would never have done well working under somebody else's instruction. Rodney's pottery studio was built about 300 feet away from his colonial farmhouse, on the edge of the woodgrove of tall, lofty trees. It was here where he was left to his own devices, so his beloved studio had literally become his home from home, and his quintessential favourite playground, the place he would ultimately escape to get away from his annoying wife Lisa. If Rodney had any regrets in his life, it was marrying that spoilt, tiresome woman, with a tongue on her as sharp as a razor blade, and with an air of such entitlement that was something he'd never been able to come to terms with. He realized his wife was a product of an affluent lifestyle, where no was not a word ever engaged in the Papadopoulos household, from where she'd grown up, and her adoring father had refused her absolutely nothing. If Rodney dared to say no to his wife Lisa, his life was frankly not worth living, so he'd found himself giving in to her every fanciful whim. It was so much easier that way, just to keep the peace. She was the kind of woman who would make a scene and have a tantrum if you didn't agree to her every request. There was no middle ground with her, no room for negotiation or frank discussion. How he regretted marrying Lisa, with all of his heart. But he had to be seen to be doing the right thing at the time, especially with Lisa's intimidating father, breathing fire down his neck like a dragon. It was 8 long years ago since he'd married Lisa, and it may as well have been a lifetime, for it certainly felt like that. The years had dragged by so slowly, like an old lady taking all day to cross to the other side of the road. Why did he feel like this? Because, put simply, he couldn't stand his wife Lisa. He loathed her. He wondered if there were other men like himself, unwillingly trapped in a loveless marriage. He certainly hoped he was not alone. Did other men own up to their unhappiness, he wondered? Or did they clandestinely bury it away, like a squirrel hides their acorns away from prying eyes? Did they bravely try to get on with their lives as best as they could, stoically wearing a smile on their faces, like the colourful tie they put on every morning before work? The idea that others might be suffering like he was, plodding along dutifully in their disabled marriages, brought him a small measure of comfort. Ostensibly, there was some truth in the age-old adage that misery loves company. He had been 20 at the time, when he tied the knot with Lisa. How callow, naive, ignorant of the world's duplicitous and guileful ways he had been, and how he wished he had stood up for himself at the time. But regret was not something he could afford to entertain. It would only pepper his life with more frustrated chaos, and there was no point in dwelling on a situation he could not easily change, without ruffling feathers and causing a great deal of unrest. The last person in the world he wanted to upset was Mr. Papadopoulos, for that man was made out of his darkest nightmares. He would never forget the day that was to change his life forever. It all began when the defiant 19-year-old Lisa Papadopoulos came thundering to his parents' front door, her hazel brown eyes blazing furiously. The indignant woman had knocked on the door as if she was a mad housewife whacking dough furiously hard with a rolling pin in order to make it more malleable. "I need to speak to your son right now," she demanded, when Rodney's mother Josie had opened the door to what she could only describe as an irate young woman wearing the expression of a black thundercloud on her face. "What is this about, young lady?" Mrs. Van Furen had asked. "My name is Lisa Papadopoulos," the young woman had corrected her haughtily. "If you don't mind, this is between me and your son," she had said caustically. "I need to speak to him at once, this minute." Mrs. Van Furen didn't like the brusque, clipped tone of this young, presumptuous young lady, who had barged into her front door like a wild horse eager to tear down its stable. She was not used to a young woman speaking to her so curtly, as if she was the household skivvy, rather than Rodney's own mother. She told herself the girl seemed upset about something. She should make allowances for her. Then suddenly she thought she knew what this was about, and a nauseous taste impregnated the back of her throat. "Please God, no," she thought. "Don't let my son have made this girl pregnant. Dear God, please not her. Anyone else but her." Mrs. Van Furen had decided when she'd laid eyes on Lisa Papadopoulos that she didn't like this self-important, stuck-up, disagreeable, very arrogant young lady. Even a little bit. The woman was so sour she could easily curdle cream, not to mention people's stomachs. "Very well," she said. "I'll call him. You make yourself comfortable in the kitchen. It's the room there on the left. Just go there and sit over on one of those bar chairs around the marble island." When Rodney was told by his mother that a toffee-nosed young lady was there to see him, and appeared to be capriciously belligerent, Rodney began to wonder who his visitor could be. But based on his mother's description, Miss High and Mighty could only fit Lisa Papadopoulos's profile. When he observed the overbearing, familiar young lady sitting there defiantly on the bar stool in his kitchen, swinging her legs against the lower panels of the island, his heart dropped like a heavy stone, sinking to the bottom of a large lake. What the hell did she want? He hoped he'd never see that girl again. What was she doing at his parents' house? She had a real nerve coming here, he thought. Lisa Papadopoulos had been all over him at that party he had attended a couple of months ago, and this persuasive, manipulative young lady had practically thrown herself shamelessly at him, like wet toilet roll being flung across a classroom. He'd never liked Lisa Papadopoulos. No one really did. Why he had allowed himself to be swept away by her, like a hat blown away by the wind, God only knows. One thing had led to another, and after one night of awkward, rather embarrassing fumbling between the two of them, he hoped he'd never see the likes of her again. He'd been deliberately avoiding her ever since on the university campus, but now there she was, like a very bad odorous smell, sitting there presumptuously in the kitchen, like a puffed-up, conceited penguin that thought the world about herself. And to make matters far worse, She seemed too comfortable in her own boots for his liking. She had made herself at home on the bar stool, continuing to swing her long legs annoyingly against the gleaming white-polished wooden panels of his mother's beloved island. "What do you want, Lisa?" he asked her gingerly. "I told you I'm sorry about what happened at the party 2 months back. I really am. I think you know we both got carried away. But as I told you last Wednesday, when you kept bugging me on campus, I'm not interested in a relationship with you. I've been telling you that for ages, Lisa, but you don't seem to know the meaning of the word no. I thought I made my position clear to you. I need to focus on my fine arts degree. I've not got time to get caught up in all kinds of relationship issues. I just want to be footloose and fancy-free at this stage of my life. I would appreciate it if you left me alone, Lisa. And as for coming to my parents' house like this, it's an incredible cheek. If you wanted to speak to me in person, why didn't you text me or ask me to meet you for a coffee somewhere?" "That's easy, Rodney. You wouldn't have answered my text, would you? And as for meeting me for coffee, that would never ever happen, would it? You used me that night 2 months ago, and no one should kick me to the curb like this. Is that how it works with you? No one treats me like this, Rodney, and gets away with it. I know you've been deliberately avoiding me, and that's really heartless and cruel. I thought what we had between the two of us was special." "If I remember correctly, it was you propositioning me, not the other way round, Lisa," said Rodney. "I am bloody pregnant, and what are you going to do about it?" she said with a smug, triumphant look on her face, as if she had him now by the short and curlies, and he could not do a damn thing about it. "You're what?" asked Rodney, his face going white. "You heard. Do I need to spell it out to you?" "Well, what are you going to do about it?" asked Rodney obsequiously. "What am I going to do about it? Are you joking?" said Lisa insolently, rolling her brown eyes in the back of her head. "That's rich coming from you, Rodney. Oh, it's typical, isn't it? You don't want to take responsibility for what you've done to me." "Well, what exactly do you want me to do about it, Lisa? You're the one that's pregnant. The choice is in your hands. It's your body, not mine. I doubt I have any say in the matter anyway. But whatever your decision, I'm willing to support you all the way, whether it be financial or emotional. I can't say fairer than that." "I'm keeping the baby, and I think in the circumstances we should get married, don't you, Rodney?" "Lisa, for goodness sake, be realistic. You're 19. I'm only a couple of months older than you are. We're both very young. People at our age don't get married. As I was saying, I will support you with a baby. Of course I will. But I don't even know you. Well, not really. I've seen you around campus from time to time. We had one fling. That was it. But it was instigated by you, I might add. I was the one that was trying to walk away. But you literally pinned me down like a dog on a chain. I thought we'd been careful, but I'm sure you appreciate. I can't be tied down at such a young age. It would be folly for us to get married. We have nothing in common, and I don't even love you. And that might be a start for an enduring relationship, surely." "I knew you would do this. It's so typical," said Lisa fractiously, picking up an empty bottle of white wine on the kitchen counter and flinging it at the opposite wall, so that it smashed into hundreds of glass shards. "You're such a loser, Rodney. So predictable. So incredibly predictable. I might have known you'd react like this. You're textbook. You're no different to those other boys at campus, using and abusing women and spitting them out all the time. It makes me sick. I hate you. Did you hear that, Rodney? I bloody hate you. You should do the right thing by me and ask me to be your wife. But look at you. You're no gentleman. You're a loser,
and thanks to you, my baby will grow up without a father, because you haven't got the guts to be a chivalrous gentleman or to do the right thing by me. In the olden days, your behaviour would have been described as scandalous."
Mrs. Van Vuren came hurriedly dashing into the kitchen after hearing the dreadful sound of glass shattering and Lisa's high-pitched wailing. "What on earth is all this noise about?" she cried out in horror, staring nonplussed at the smashed glass on the floor. Some pieces looked treacherously sharp and jagged. Mrs. Van Vuren was relieved that no one had been hurt. She looked at Lisa disapprovingly. "Did you just throw that empty bottle of wine at the wall?" she asked the young lady, her voice unable to disguise her abject disgust. "So what if I did?" said Lisa with a condescending smirk. "I am sorry, Lisa, if that's what you call yourself, but I didn't invite you in my house to go smashing glass at will. This is not how we behave in the Van Vuren household. You're far too old to be behaving like a 2-year-old brat. Have you any comprehension how dangerous it is to throw wine bottles around the place? Did it not even occur to you that a glass shard could get caught in someone's eye or lodged itself into someone's chest? I used to be a nurse, Lisa, at the local hospital, and in accident and emergency I would see dreadful accidents because of people like yourself throwing stuff like this around. One woman killed her husband that way, when a glass shard plunged into his heart. She was devastated about what had happened, but she should have known better than throwing a glass vase around. And you should have known better as well, Lisa." "Oh, get over yourself," said Lisa, "and keep your butt out of our business, Mrs. Van Vuren. You're the one that's overreacting here, not me," said Lisa, bulldozing contemptuously past Mrs. Van Vuren in the kitchen, where she thundered into the hall, finally exiting the house through the front door, banging it loudly behind her with a mighty slam. They could hear her swanky white Mercedes accelerating down their drive as she sped off and was gone faster than a flash of lightning, and only when they were sure she had finally left the property did Rodney and his mother breathe a sigh of relief. "What on earth is her problem, Rodney?" asked Mrs. Van Vuren, looking at her son in horror. "That young lady has got an unbridled temper on her. If she's got a gripe with you, why does she not talk about it to you in a civilized manner, like a normal, well-rounded human being? Instead, she waltzes into our house as if she owns the place, like an elephant in a china shop, and throws a wobbly in our kitchen." Mrs. Van Vuren pats her forehead with a towel, as the unpleasant incident had made her break out into a sizable sweat. Her heart was flapping in her chest from the aftershock of such a tumultuous scare. Oh dear, I've seen some unruly, insubordinate behaviour in my lifetime, but that girl takes the biscuit. Why on earth did she do that with the wine bottle? Has she lost leave of her senses, Rodney? It's the first time I've met her, and I sincerely hope it will be the last." "She behaves like that, Mum, because she comes from an affluent family, I'm told. It's new money, I believe, who have not tamed her cocky insolence, but have actually probably encouraged her to be so overbearing. I've been told by those who know her that she's a daddy's girl. He gives her everything she could possibly want. She's got that pretentious bumptiousness and contemptuous pride that comes about from someone who's never had to work for anything a day in their life. I just wish, Mum, I'd never had the misfortune to cross her path in campus. Unfortunately, she's doing a fine arts degree, but she's not talented at all. I have no comprehension why she's actually doing it. I had a fling with her 2 months back, and she's been bugging me ever since, demanding that we go steady. I told her I was not in the least bit interested. I think because I keep fobbing her off, she keeps coming back to me like a desperate puppy dog. It's pathetic. The more I reject her, the more irresistible I seem to become to her. There is no other word for her, but she's a precocious little brat," said Mrs. Van Vuren, wiping her hands on her apron, as if wiping away the unfortunate woman she'd just met. "I hope I never see that lady again. Her kind in my life I can well do without.
Her parents should be ashamed of themselves. I do not care if they've got enough gold to sink the Titanic, or enough cash to drown the Bank of America. If those parents had said no to that cocky-handed high horse just a few times in her life, she might not have turned out to be so obnoxiously objectionable. I've never had a young lady address me in the way she did just now. I'm appalled. Mum, brace yourself for some bad news. I don't know how to tell you this, but she's pregnant with my baby. She's intending to keep it. That's what all the commotion was about. I didn't react in the way she hoped I would. She had a hissy fit, threw a wine bottle at the wall. She was a hell of a scary when she got angry, as you yourself saw. Oh, my God, son! For once in my life, I'm lost for words. What have you done? Said Mrs. Van Vuren, placing a startled hand over her mouth. And with her, of all people. Anybody else but her. Don't you know the cardinal rules in life, son? Did me and your father never teach you anything? Never ever get intimate with someone you would not be prepared to spend the rest of your life with. It could come back to bite you, and it clearly has. That young lady is toxically poisonous. You know how old-fashioned your father can be. He'll put the pressure on you to get married to her. He won't want any grandchild of his to be raised without a solid foundation. And even if you don't marry her, that woman will remain in our lives whether we like it or not, because she's carrying your child in her womb, which is also our grandchild. That's what she wants, Mum. She wants me to marry her. She made that very clear to me. Who wants to marry who? Asked Mr. Van Vuren, entering the kitchen at the most inopportune time. Mr. Van Vuren was a 6-foot teddy bear with the heart of a lion, but he had very staunch views when it came to matters concerning family. Children at all times needed to be raised by 2 adults, in his humble opinion. He was an esteemed psychologist who worked with dysfunctional children every single day of his life, kids badly damaged from broken homes. Mr. Van Vuren had returned home from work, and Rodney and his mother had not heard his approach. He threw a copy of the newspaper onto the kitchen counter, marching over to the refrigerator to remove a large jug of homemade lemonade from the glass shelf. The ice in the jug tinkled as he poured some lemonade into a very large tumbler, and then he drank it back in one long gulp, while Mrs. Van Vuren and her son gave each other awkward, somewhat dismayed glances. They knew they'd have to let the cat out of the bag sooner or later, and neither of them were sure how Mr. Van Vuren would ultimately react to the news. By all accounts, learning his son had fathered a child at 19 years old would likely go down with him like a lead balloon. Ah, that is so much better. It's quite hot out there today. The air conditioner at the office is on the blink, would you believe it? The suppliers are only going to fix it in the morning. In some of my therapy sessions today, my clients were sweating buckets. It was quite dreadful. I thought I was going to die in those offices. It was unbearable. I was quite parched, but no matter how much water I drank, I don't seem to be hydrated. He glanced from his wife to his son. Now, what's going on here? Why do I feel that there's an elephant in the room that you don't want to talk about? Especially to me. I noticed how silent you became when I intruded on your conversation. So I'm assuming it's something you don't want to tell me, which concerns me greatly. So are you going to tell me what's going on? Or am I going to have to squeeze you for the information, like a tube of toothpaste very hard, or like one of my clients that refuses to talk? I'm very good at getting the truth out. I do it every day of my life.
Sweetheart, in this case you do well not to ask any questions, because you're absolutely right. Your flapping ears would be best served if you didn't listen to this, said Mrs. Van Vuren, wrapping her arms around her husband in an affectionate hug.
You are right. There is an elephant in the room that we don't really want to talk about, I'm afraid. You're on to the money about that. I'm afraid Rodney here. Well, he's got himself into a spot of trouble.
What kind of trouble, son, have you got yourself embroiled in? He asked with concerned grey eyes. What have you done?
There is no easy way to say this, honey. But Rodney, well, he's made a young girl on campus pregnant, I'm afraid. She's going to have the baby. She's very insistent about that, I believe. Her name is Lisa Papadopoulos.
When you say Papadopoulos, are you talking about Freddie Papadopoulos's daughter? Yes, I think that's her father's name, said Rodney. Oh, I've heard rumours about that dreadful man. Not good ones, I'm afraid. Oh, my word, son, what have you done? The man's involved in organised crime, but he's never been caught. Far too clever for that. Not the kind of family I want any son of mine involved with. But I am glad she's having the baby. That's the right thing to do in the circumstances. No one is going to abort a grandchild of mine. But, son, you are far too young to become a father at 19 years old. What have you done? Why did you let this happen? I thought you'd be so much more responsible than this. I don't know what to do, Dad. I've really messed up, said Rodney. How do you know he's involved in organised crime, Dad? I don't know if he is. That's the rumours that are going around. But sometimes rumours have a glimmer of the truth, don't they? I don't know what to do, Dad. I really messed up, said Rodney. I mean, I've got my fine arts degree, and now this. I never expected this to happen. Too right, you messed up, son. And as for expecting this to happen, well, not expecting this to happen, I mean, you are incredibly naive. If you put your hand in the fire, you're invariably going to get burnt. But the problem is people make the same old mistake over and over again. I find this all the time in my practice. They always believe it's going to happen to someone else, never ever to them. You know what you need to do now. The chivalrous thing is to marry her in the circumstances, even if the poor girl has the misfortune to be Freddie Papadopoulos's daughter. But I mean, beggars can't be choosers. It's the right thing to do, isn't it? But, Dad, I'm far too young to get married. And these days people have children out of wedlock all the time. They don't necessarily get married, do they? This is why, son, there are so many dysfunctional kids out there that develop all kinds of issues, as they have not had two parents watching over their charge. I see it all the time in my work. The devastation of broken families. I don't want to see that happen to our grandchild. You may be too young to get married, son, but your baby is too young to grow up without a father. And if you don't get married, then you will be a distant father. You won't have a hands-on relationship with your child. You do realize that children that grow up without parental role models can end up with all kinds of issues. Some children will feel abandoned and unloved. Do you want to do that to your own son or your own daughter? No, of course not, Dad. In theory, what you say makes sense. But it's not very practical. Because you see, I don't love Lisa. And if the truth be told, I don't like her either. How can I possibly marry someone that I actually loathe? Well, son, as I've told you since you were old enough to understand, you never, and I mean never, get intimate with someone you don't love. Only a fool does that. You could end up saddled with their baby. You are now in a precarious position where you have to take responsibility for the baby's sake, because this is your child we're talking about. This is not about you anymore.
There is a young, vulnerable life to consider. You're going to have to be very unselfish about this matter. Do the right thing by your baby. I can't tell you what to do, son, but I strongly advise you to marry this young woman who you have got pregnant. There are a lot of people out there who would strongly disagree with my suggestion. But it is unfortunate that you don't like her. But you have made your bed. You're going to have to lie on it and make the best of a bleak situation. This is your responsibility, son.
We're not living in the 1950s, sweetheart, said Josie Van Vuren. Our son can do the right thing for the baby without having to marry that disagreeable girl. Surely. You have no idea what she's like, Hugo. Why, I don't believe I've ever met such a condescending little brat.
Look, sweetheart, many people around the world marry people they don't even know. It's called an arranged marriage. Believe it or not, the success rate of those relationships is 1,000 times better than marriages you see here in America. People think a relationship is all about passion. Absolutely not. Marriages all require hard work in order to make them succeed. It's like anything in life. What you put into it is what you will get back out of it. I'm sure our son can make it work with this young lady, if he puts his mind to it. And you never know, in time he may grow to love her. After all, she is the mother of his child.
But you don't know what she's like, Hugo. It's not that simple. I promise you it's not. You haven't met her. She came barging into our house today, demanding to speak to Rodney. She is one of the most appalling young women I have ever had the privilege to meet. And it's all because she's been raised so badly.
You've only met her briefly, sweetheart, and far too quickly to form an opinion. Of course she's upset she's pregnant. Wouldn't you be? You might not have seen her at her very best. I'm not exactly the nicest person when I'm in a cantankerous mood. Give the girl a break, will you? Maybe she's not as bad as she sounds. And if she's had her eye on Rodney, well, I'll give her this. She's got excellent taste in young men, and that's a promising start. I think you need to go and see the young lady, Rodney. Test the water for yourself. See where you want to go to from here, going forward, I mean. Me and your mother will support you every step of the way. Any decision you make, you've got our back. You know my feelings on the matter. I personally could not imagine what it would have been like if I had abandoned you when you were young, leaving Josie to take care of you by herself. The thought is too preposterous to even entertain.
Well, I do admit, I wouldn't have coped terribly well, being a single mother, admitted Josie. Even if you had been financially helping me, Hugo. It's tough being a parent, especially a single one. They never tell you that in the small print, do they? Society makes it all out to be so cute. But what about the dirty nappies, the sleepless nights? They never tell you all about that. I think I should write a book. I'll call it The Darker Side of Becoming a Full-Time Parent. Rodney had decided that the best thing he could possibly do was to visit Lisa. His father was absolutely right. One way or another, having a baby to care for so young was going to ultimately wreak havoc on his entire life, turning everything upside down and higgledy-piggledy. Things had certainly ended badly that day when Lisa fortuitously visited their property. But what did she expect when she pulled that trick out of the bag like this and seemed to expect Rodney to jump up and down for joy like an ebullient puppy dog? It was hard to even conceive of becoming a father. It was something he was looking forward to way ahead in the future, but certainly not now, not when he was 19 years old, for goodness sake. When Rodney arrived at the Papadopoulos' ostentatious Charleston home, he was somewhat taken aback. The lofty, somewhat pompous Italianate architecture was pretentiously over the top. The swanky house boasted a large white wall that fringed the outer boundaries of the entire property, where several large statues that looked like they emulated the statue of the David in Italy were on full display,
screaming a perverse vulgarity. They were all about 15 foot tall, very well endowed figurines, set about 3 feet apart. One statue might have been all right, but dozens of these replicas, in front of the outside boundary wall, just reeked of new money, little style, and certainly no savoir-faire. The ostentatious black wrought iron gates opened for him when he spoke through the security intercom to announce his arrival. "Hello, I'm here to see Lisa, please. It is Rodney here, Rodney van Vuren." He got the strange impression his visit was expected. Rodney drove his very ordinary car down the lavish driveway to the front of the gingerbread-like house. His stomach squirmed in disgust. The whole place was just so in your face, as if the over-embellished gilded house itself was saying to him pompously, "Hey, look at me. I'm so fabulously resplendent and florid. What is someone like you doing here?" Rodney felt out of his depth as he reluctantly walked up the sandstone steps towards the ostentatious, gleaming black front door, to be greeted by a beaming Lisa. How different her demeanour was now. She spoke to him in a cloying, syrupy, sweet voice. "Oh, Rodney, I'm so glad you've come. I was expecting you. It's brilliant to see you." Rodney was taken aback by this. Why would Lisa be expecting him, after the drama that had ensued at his house, when Lisa had thrown the empty bottle of wine at the wall of the kitchen? Was she a great manipulator who knew how to get exactly what she wanted from everyone? One little tantrum and they'd come running, like he'd done tonight. Lisa's mother came hurrying up towards Rodney, throwing her golden brown arms around him effusively, as if he was the prodigal son who had returned home after a long sabbatical. "It is so good to see you, Rodney. So good. Lisa's told me all about you. I feel as if I've known you all my life. Let's have a look at you," she said, stepping backwards. "Oh, you're so right, Lisa. He looks just like the statue of the David," she giggled. "And I'm told that you look even better, Rodney, without your clothes on," she said, giving the young man a wink. Rodney blushed a bright red colour. He couldn't believe that Mrs. Papadopoulos was being so inappropriate. "You have such an innocent, angelic face, dear, and the bluest eyes that I would die to swim in. You've got the cutest dimples," she said, squeezing Rodney's cheeks on either side. "But I know that underneath the innocent bravado is quite the little tiger," she said, making a little growl. "Ah, ah. I like my men to bite," she said with a giggle. "Oh, my God, I wish I was young again," she said. "I'm stuck with Lisa's father, and let's just say, well, he's let himself go a little, but don't you dare tell him I told you so. He'll be most affronted. Isn't Lisa so lucky to be able to stare at you all day long, like a Renaissance painting? Oh, how I envy her! But wait until I tell my friends about my daughter's new love. You better watch yourself, Rodney. Some of my friends aren't quite as tame as I am. They just might want to eat you. You're so sumptuous." "Oh, Mum, please stop embarrassing me." "Oh, goodness gracious, Lisa. Oh, stop being so overreactive. I'm quite sure that Rodney here has been propositioned many times before. Haven't you, Rodney, dear?" she said, tweaking his cheeks. "Not really," said Rodney politely. "Oh, nonsense! I don't believe that for a single moment. You're being incredibly bashful. A young man as handsome as you. I don't buy that for a second." So there we are. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until next time, goodbye and good night.